we're going to begin this, what can we call it, exploration of this whole mystical psychological area. And let me tell you the vision in this. One of the things I have experienced throughout time as a psychologist is that first, when I was studying in the Iberoamericana University, there was a rumor that there was something called transpersonal, and some of us started putting our hands into that. And we were the crazy, the hippies, using mushrooms and weird people. The rest of the people didn't get into these gray areas of the matter. And in fact, I had the opportunity to go to Texas to do a parapsychology work with kids that time. And the word transpersonal was literally seen as charlatanery, charlatans, except if you were in the area of San Francisco, you were a charlatan in there among the academics. So it was interesting to see throughout the years how this transpersonal thing leaks into the academic area, but with an absolute prohibition. You can say the word transpersonal, but you cannot mention the word spiritual because that's not serious. And then you could pretend that you were serious, talking about transpersonal stuff. And different proposals arose, especially in the area of California, of Colorado, with the University of Choyang-Trumpa, and oddly enough, in Mexico City, I would say. And here and there in other places. But Mexico was always a place that was very open to different trends. And nowadays, of course, transpersonal psychology is here to stay, not only in the academic environment, but in the public in general. But one of the things proven with this process of understanding transpersonal psychology is the very little practical applications. It became a whole exploration, psychological, philosophical exploration of reality, and the aspect of practicality, and especially more specifically, since we're talking about psychology, the aspect of psychotherapy was in a way also left developing at a whole different speed. And so it's interesting, master's degrees in transpersonal psychology are offered, where people are marveled talking about this, but at the end of this training, what can you do as a transpersonal psychology? Well, just teach, continue talking about things. What can we do in a practical way? Who knows? So it's interesting. It's nice that ideas come and we renovate and bring new concepts and interpretations, but it's important to bring something practical. What is this all good for? At least what we're going to talk about during these days is psychology. It's not philosophy. And in all that, you know that we offered a series in transpersonal psychology here in Ontogony. I remind you, let me put this, you know, the subject, contemplative psychology, transpersonal contemplative psychology, and I will talk about it. But just for you to have a vision, a while ago, I taught a series last year, a series of subjects in this area, touching different traditional paths and attempting to profit the practical aspect. How would a transpersonal tantric transpersonal psychology be like, or a yoga, transpersonal psychology, and Kabbalah, Taoism, etc. But if you see this list, what you can very easily detect is that even if it's implicit in Kabbalah, because I have always said that Christianism is Kabbalah, we don't touch in this series the aspect, the more Christian aspect, because when we touch Kabbalah, even although some Christian aspects can be touched, the practical application was more through the Jewish Kabbalah. And then going through this series, I felt the need to bring a more purely Christian thing. And in this Christian aspect, I have a problem, which is that the Christian tradition of practice became a lot a ritual follow-up, especially in the places for retreat, convents, and places like that. And much of the practicality of the experience is removed and taken away from the people in general. And when the people in general receive as practice, is a religion with its rituals, its sacraments, but not necessarily is there a clean or clear invitation to grow in that. There's a lot of moral advice, improving your life, not committing sin, confessing with a certain hope for introspection. But we see all these play which has occurred in religion, that it's truly difficult to create a deep growth experience. And clearly this experience of deep growth, we find it in this group of mystics throughout history. And here the problem is that Christian mysticism, although it's in a simple way being justified with the scriptures, it doesn't drink from a strong tradition of practice. What does this mean? For example, in the Jewish religion, like any other religion, has its rituals, its exposure to the people in general, but it always kept a tradition of spiritual practice, which was Kabbalah. And in the Christian tradition, somehow this practice is disconnected as the church became more anti-Semitical. The Kabbalistic practice schools were cut off, which were the schools of prophecy working centuries before. And we see it reflected in the prophetic experience of the Old Testament. And the Christian mysticism starts to be a sort of sui generis exploration of do as you find appropriate and or as you are inspired to grow in God. We see all these sometimes bizarre intent of the fathers of the desert, bringing practices that are terribly weird, like spending years climbed on top of a pillar to renounce absolutely everything. And in this sense, even if they have a motivation of communion with God, they're not justified, neither in the scriptures nor in a tradition of practice. And nowadays, when you look for practices of contemplation or Christian meditation, you're in general referred to the exercises of Loyola, which have a contemplative intellectual taste, but which are the few proposals of growth method generated by the Christian branch. And here, what's difficult when we're talking about studying and profiting from the mystical experience to somehow have a psychological application, we find, regrettably, a lot of pathology in our mysticism. We find all this confusion, mistaking our sinful tendency to the satanic and the demonic possessions and all these type of things, making it very difficult to have a practicality without entering all this world of a cosmic, mystical struggle between good and evil and all these things. And of course, there's many mystics in different countries throughout the history of Christianism. And looking around which could be a good example, a good attempt of profiting in a more practical way nowadays within the vision of psychology. Of course, there's some 20 people that come to me, but these two we're going to be studying these days, Saint Teresa and San Juan de la Cruz, provide a very good example of what would be an exploration of mysticism at trying to propose a process of growth that can be a universal model of growth for the Christian, but also taking into account this aspect of neurosis. Of course, not exactly calling it that with that term, but it becomes interesting because one of the things that has caused so much confusion in Christian and other mysticisms is the lack of understanding of this aspect of neurosis, because this is generally taken and put in the garbage can of the satanic, and that's it. And when it is placed like this, there's a space, a very large abyss of how we can integrate that negativity in us and procure a deep psychological growth, because all that is in that satanic area should rather be renounced. I renounce the devil and all his works. And if I'm lucky, all my neurosis is there also, and what I don't want to acknowledge in my experience. So if you have read the biographies of mystics, I have a lot of fun doing that. You're going to see big states of consciousness, of communion, and the experience of love, etc. And on the other hand, behaviors, completely neurotic behaviors, we cannot do anything but see. And this fragmentation, this bipolarity in the human experience is largely due precisely to that, not acknowledging these aspects within us and blaming the devil. That's literally what we do. And nowadays, in the popular imitations of mysticism, we see the same trend. I'm referring, for example, to some charismatic groups which have all these baptism of fire and the spirit, etc., which have fallen in this experience of led by the spirit of exorcising people from all their evil, even classifying all that we could call classifying psychology as simply neurotic behaviors. They reclassified it, naming it with this is the name of the demons. So you have the demon of this and the demon of that. And in fact, there's hundreds of demons which are simply from psychology, neurotic behaviors. But then psychotherapy, spiritual charismatic psychotherapy is exercising these people, which is the same problem we had historically in the Christian mysticism, not acknowledging it as mine and basically fighting against it. And here, indeed, there is a problem with deep psychology. This is preventing precisely our process, stopping it literally because we are fighting our own unconscious content. So that has been a big problem. And when we want to, or when I have wanted to take elements of the Christian mysticism, I have wondered how can we apply it, because here a philosophical problem indeed is present in me, because it becomes very difficult to bring it to a psychological practicality. So the attempt here is to keep a point of view from the psychology, not from a religious vision. And although I call the series Transpersonal Psychology, I'm not ashamed at all to call it spiritual psychology. I think that psychology has always been spiritual, despite the intent of psychologists for it not to be so. And in that sense, I think what these two individuals experienced and even tried to share in their time in a very active way, even, is also an intent, considering that it's something that happened centuries ago, to bring this acceptance to neurotic patterns. The devil is still there, of course, because if it's not there, you would go to hell against the dogma of the church. But in a very elegant way, in my opinion, they try to attempt to integrate and accept these aspects in us through what we could call the spiritual purification. And this becomes a good bridge. This vision becomes a good bridge between psychology and mysticism, not even not only theirs, but the Christian. But we could extend this vision to the rest of the mystics. If they, even if they didn't have this experience exactly, we could say in their mystic struggle against the evil, we could acknowledge an aspect of these purifications, which more clearly are which are more clearly stated by these two individuals. So this is not a class from the Christianism point of view. It attempts to have a psychological focus, but as we did in the other series, also from an understanding of the tradition, which basically gave these people a home. When we were talking about Buddhism, we needed to end talking about Buddhism, even if we were talking about psychology. And the same will happen with this. And the idea is also in each session, the last part of the session, I'm going to propose a sort of meditative exercise, introspective contemplation exercise, trying to follow with this idea of what can I do in practice with all this. And all the more, if you're a psychologist or a psychotherapist, perhaps some ideas within the transpersonal processes that can be aided or supported by this. I remind you something, even if most of you are known, perhaps the material is seen by later on by people who are not familiarized. All we handle, all the things we propose in these courses are simply attempts to explain reality. do not take them too seriously. It's like that's the way it is because Carlos told us that. No, they're just ways to explain their models of reality. Do not take them as truths or dogmas. And in fact, it's just my opinion. Hopefully, you will have your own opinion because that's what we need in the end, to have our own experience in all this. So, well, we're going to start. First, the word contemplation in the Christian tradition is a little representative of the process we have in the Western culture, in the evolution of the Western culture. At a certain point, the experience in the West was to praise our understanding and thus also the mystic practice was how to understand better our relationship with God, how we can go deeper through our understanding of our communion with God. And in that sense, we find passages in the Bible to justify this, analyzing the scriptures, etc., where we can justify that we need to use our reason. And in fact, many of the contemplative experiences, not only in these two people, but in the rest of the mystics, an experience is generated of analyzing, of deep introspection based on the quest for understanding the experience that the Bible is expressing. And in that intellectual depth, oddly, to get to a transcendence of the intellectual, to transcend the intellectual understanding, like in the contemplative exercises of San Ignacio de Loyola. The process is through going into or attempting to go deeper into the understanding of different biblical passages and somehow seek with your mind a personal, more intimate relationship with what is being expressed in the Bible, achieving a point where you incarnate or allow yourself to experience in your own flesh those experiences. It's very interesting, for example, if we put the example of the stigmas, these wounds of the cross of Jesus, which some of the saints or mystics have experienced, even recently, the wounds in the hands, the forehead and the heart that start bleeding with for no reason, etc. Of course, that mystical experience comes preceded by a study of the meaning of the sacrifice of Jesus for us, with of the meaning and the quest for identification with that figure in the cross, wanting to serve God, and all that needs to be understood with the mind first. And as a person uses the mind to go deeper, a point comes when the mind is transcended, and then an experience comes of suffering in Christ or together with Christ. And in that way, you are serving the redemption or to purify the sin together with Christ on the cross. And that makes you one with Jesus, etc. But usually, there is a process where the scriptures are studied. Prayer is done to ask for that until a point of bodily identification occurs, and that's the mystical state. So in that quest, we could say this is the way to contemplate, a quest for intellectual understanding, a quest for emotional identification to the point that where the wall or the distance is broken between what we're attempting to study or understand and what we experience. And then Christian contemplation becomes, at first, especially, an intellectual process. And little by little, the emotional sets in, and then you get into these states of mystical rapture. What other schools nowadays name as contemplation is completely different. For example, in Dzogchen, contemplation is a state of pure observation, naked observation with devoid of contents, not seeking to go deeper or identify, simply in a neutral, open, awakened posture, and that is called contemplation. So that's why it was important to understand what we mean by a Christian contemplation, which is different from meditative contemplation. And of course, Christian contemplation is spiritual, and the quest is how to place this, the psychology and the mystical experience and the spirituality, in something we can even apply outside the beliefs, the Christian beliefs, which these mystics had. So it's simply an exploration. I hope it's useful to all of us, and the whole process works for us, and we start now. First of all, I would like just to give you a model of understanding the psychological transformation from 5 portals or 5 emphases in this transformation. And the first point is that the psychological transformation already is talking about a process in psychology which is more related to a process of growth, and even in the transpersonal area, a growth that can reach something that we could call illumination or liberation. In more practical psychology, more therapeutical, medical, social psychology, we are not so much seeking a transformation of the person, but change, I would say, of behavior patterns, belief patterns, so that the person may adapt functionally to her environment and feel better. With this, I mean that not necessarily all the psychological processes produce growth in the person, but they simply produce a change, a reframing, a reprogramming, if you want, for the person to function better and feel better with herself. But that doesn't mean that the person is transforming or that she is changing in growth and expansion. Not at all. And in fact, a lot of people, when they seek psychotherapy, they're not seeking transformation, personal transformation. They're just seeking to be helped to function better and feel better, a little better. And also in this approach of not growth, but just readjustment, the supplement of psychiatric drugs comes very handy, because I don't really want to grow. I just want you to help me control my anxiety. So I'll take this pill twice a day, and I do reframing exercises to reprogram my structure of belief, how I understand my problems, and that's it. And it can work. The person becomes more functional. She's happier with herself and with life, but it doesn't mean that she grew or that she transformed. This somehow was implied by John Lilly in his book, Reprogramming the Human Computer. John Lilly was very funny. His brain worked very different from all of us. And he loved to explain things with other terms. And simply the title of the book is to me a mockery to these processes of human change, in quotes, that are not truly giving life to the human, but which are processes of reprogramming the human computer. Then you have a bad problem. No, don't worry, we reprogram it. Therapies such as neurolinguistics or fast therapies of hypnotherapy, even rational emotive therapies are ways to reprogram the human computer. But then you say, well, but change to illuminate and to growth is also changing the program. Yes, at first, but eventually, more than reprogramming the human computer, what we want is to leave the human computer devoid of a program, and then the human starts to be a human because he's forced to create his program of reality in a conscious way. All reality programs are taken unconsciously, but as we understand and exercise our capacity of choice and transformation, we create our own reality. And then, yes, we can talk about transformation and growth. So I just also wanted to be very clear that not necessarily because a person feels better, she's or he is changing for the better, socially understood. It means that the person is, it doesn't mean that she's transforming her being. So definitely when we're talking from the transpersonal aspect in psychology, we need to talk about transformation. Without transformation, we don't reach a transpersonal experience ever, because your transpersonal or spiritual experience, what will it do? A whole series of beliefs, a personal philosophy, but not necessarily operating a change in the being. That's important because we play a lot, not only in psychology, but also in spirituality, this game. Adopting, for example, spiritually, you adopt a doctrine, a ritual, or religion, etc., and you say that you have transformed, that God has transformed you, but in truth, what you have obtained is a reprogramming with a spiritual language, but there is no true transformation and growth. The experience of transformation will strip you little by little from your beliefs, your values, your programs, and it will force you sooner or later to create your own experience in a conscious way and in a responsible way. So when we're, for example, talking about the application of transpersonal psychology, no matter the path we are following, in general, all paths are all going to be through stripping ourselves from what we have inherited as reality. So that means that growing involves work, inner work. And this is very well understood in the mysticism also. So, well, remember, this is a model. This is not the truth, but it's an interesting model. And we say, well, if I want to grow, if I want to transform, of course, the human being has a total integral holistic experience. But the fact is, we have generated different trends that emphasize aspects of our life. And just for you to have broader relationships in your understanding, in the pentagram of the 5 elements used in Western magic, which where we mentioned the 4 typical elements: earth, water, fire, and wind, and the 5 element is the spirit or akash or ether. They involve certain experiences, certain human experiences that are going to manifest in different paths of transformation. And I will explain this.